today. Okay, so on the agenda for today, we'll go over some background information of the QIO, the layout and scoring. We'll do a demo. We'll go over how we'll be using the results, what's coming up next, and then we'll have a question and answer time at the end. We have a lot of content to cover today, so feel free to type in the chat as we go, and if it's a quick answer, we'll address it as we go. Otherwise, we'll hold the longer ones for the end, and if we don't have time to get to all of them, we'll send out answers to all of your questions after the meeting. So we'll start with the background information. Where did the QIO come from and why are we doing it? This picture shows how things fit inside of each other, with the outermost circle being our SIP, which is our State Systemic Improvement Plan. And that is our multi-year plan for improving results for infants and toddlers with disabilities. And it includes 3 phases: data analysis, the plan, and then implementation and evaluation, which is where we're at now. Then within the SIP, we have our SIMR. That's our State Identified Measurable Result, which is the long-term goal of our SIP. And that is infants and toddlers who receive early intervention services in Colorado will demonstrate increased growth in the use of appropriate behaviors to get their needs met. And then within our SIP and SIMR, we have Go For It, which I know you are all very familiar with. And that's the implementation of our improvement strategy to meet the long-term goal outlined in our SIMR and SIP. And then we have the QIO, which is the evaluation of the improvement strategy. So Go For It and QIO are that 3rd phase of the SIP, the implementation and evaluation, and that's where we're at right now. And that's why we've developed the QIO. More background information: the QIO provides objective criteria for examining IFSP and outcome quality, and that allows us to assess IFSP quality in a standardized way. It allows us to show the connection between Go For It activities and quality. We can see changes in quality over time, identify strengths and training needs, and then it can support us with succession planning. So the QIO tool was adapted from Naomi Youngren of the Department of Defense. And then we also use the quality indicator rubric that's being used by the Part C program in Kansas. And we adapted those 2 things to align with our IFSP form, the data system, and our IFSP training. And then the cohort 1 of Go For It and the EI State team participated in 2 phases of testing, and extensive feedback was provided and used in finalizing our tool. We can also make adjustments to it at any time. So if you have any feedback or recommendations as you start to use it, feel free to let us know. So the QIO tool is divided into 6 pages. The first one is background info and instructions. We have IFSP and assessor information. And then the 3 scoring pages are the family assessment, concerns priorities, global outcomes, and IFSP outcomes. And then at the end of the tool, you'll have an overall quality score and recap page. So that'll include scoring for each of the 3 scoring pages, and then it will auto-calculate your overall quality score. And I know we briefly talked about scoring during the QIO intro on the Community of Practice call, but I wanted to visit the rating scale again because I know some of you are on that call. And I think it will help make sense of the tool when we dive into the demo. So the QIO tool itself only provides descriptions for 0, not acceptable, 2, acceptable, and 4, best practice. And then those in-between ratings of 1 and 3 come into play when you're applying a section score. So if you've made some scoring in not acceptable and acceptable, you can kind of average it out and give the section a rating of 1. And that will make more sense when we do the demo, which we'll start right now. So we're going to use Elizabetta, which you probably recognized from your universal training. And we recommend using the print PDF view when you're doing your self-assessments because it allows you to scroll through more easily than if you're using IFSP Home. The only thing you want to keep in mind is the plan of action include on print checkbox will need to be checked for that part to show up. So if you get to the plan of action and it's blank, you'll just want to double check you're not missing it. Okay, so here is the first page with some brief background information, goes over the scoring again, shows the rating key, and then we have links to some resources like the QIO Assessment Tool User Guide, the IFSP Training Instruction Manual, and we definitely recommend using that user guide side by side while you do your first few self-assessments because there's some additional details and reminders that aren't on the tool itself. And we definitely want you to read through that at least before doing your first self-assessment. Now we'll go to the next page, which is assessor and IFSP information. And once you've done an assessment, it will recognize your information, so it makes it a little quicker to input. And then for AJA IFSP development, if you don't want to do that math in your head, there's a calculation tool link where you just enter the child's date of birth and then the IFSP meeting date, and that will tell you how old they were on that date. And you just enter it in there. I'm just going to choose a random CCD for this one. And then next we'll enter the areas of delay so that we can consider that as we go through the IFSP. So it looks like this one's cognitive, communication, and social emotional. And then I recommend skimming at least through the results summary information, and you'll see how that applies later. We just want to make sure nothing is copy and pasted from there, or there's one part where you want to see if information has been previously referenced, so that gives us a good place to start, and then we can scroll back up if we need to reference it again. Okay, now we're at the first scoring section for the family assessment, which is combined with concerns, priorities, and resources. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So you'll see that we have 4 columns on the tool. We have missing required information. So that is for anything that is 100% required. Otherwise, that section is not acceptable. So you can see if we check one here, the calculation buttons are removed as a reminder that you can only rate the section not acceptable. So we recommend using the tool from left to right because a lot of our IFSPs are starting closer to the not acceptable area since it's based on some new criteria and we're just getting into our quality initiatives. So we can read through the family assessment. This is a pretty short one. We'll start with required info. We have the tool used, filled out, routine, time of day, and what does this look like? Don't have any blanks in either of those. We don't have the family satisfaction score, so we'll go ahead and check that box. And let's scroll down and just make sure we don't have any blanks. There aren't any blanks in concerns, priorities, or resources. So next, if we move into the not acceptable column, we'll see some checkbox items that apply to this family assessment. This first one does not include enough enough routines to visualize what this child and family's day look like. We only have 5 routines and none of them are individualized to that family. So I'm going to go ahead and check that one. Routines are limited to just a few words. There's little detail. And then we can go over to acceptable and make sure we're not missing anything from here. I'm going to go ahead and check routine information includes times of day that are going well, because we do see some of that. She loves to play with her dad, family has dinner, so it kind of goes through those parts of the day that are going well for the family. And again, because we have missing required information, we'll give an overall section score of not acceptable. And we have some scoring reminders down here for that. And then we've piped in the areas of delay that you entered on the last page as a reminder, the age at IFSP development, and then a reminder for what ICE there is. And I actually forgot to finish up this section. We want to scroll down and check the boxes that go with the family concerns, priorities, resources. Family's concerned, mom is concerned that Elizabetta is not able to tell her what she wants. This becomes challenging when she has to guess what she wants to eat or play with. It is also hard when she gets upset and she does not know why. So there's some good information there, but if we look at this not acceptable column, we can see your family's concerns appear to be new information not referenced within the family assessment. So we would go ahead and check that box. And same with the family's priorities. Now we'll go to the next page, which is global outcomes. We can scroll down to that section. Again, we'll check for missing required information. We don't have any blanks on this page, so we can move over to the next column. Let's see, one or more global outcome information is limited to only a few words. We don't have a whole lot of information in some of these areas, so I'm going to check that one. There's a couple areas where we can see technical jargon. I'm going to check that box. Some of these strengths and needs are described as isolated tasks or discrete skills. They aren't summarized functionally within routines, so that's why I'm checking that box. And again, it's new information that we haven't seen before. I'm checking that box. Now we can go over to acceptable and see if there's any acceptable parts of the global outcomes section. I think we can say that information in strengths and needs is clearly aligned with the correct global outcome. So the information that is there is in the right section. And now we can calculate the total for each column. So it's showing us how many not acceptable and how many acceptable items we've checked. And then we use our discretion to apply the overall section score, which I'm going to say not acceptable for this one. Now the next section is IFSP outcomes, the plan of action. And this is broken out into subcategories based on each category of the plan of action. The first one being the priority. And we see the priority is listed as communication. So that's written as services. And is it directly pulled from family's priorities? If we scroll up and look at the family's priorities, it's related, but it isn't directly pulled from that. Next, we'll look at the IFSP outcome. And we'll have you type in the actual outcome, but make sure you don't include any children's names because we don't currently have this encrypted. And if Elizabetta will say more words. And now we can rate that subsection. I'm going to say it's broad. It doesn't appear to be specific to this child or family. And it's written as non-functional skills. So saying more words, but we don't see a function attached to that. If we go over to the acceptable column, it is linked to the family priorities, even though it wasn't directly pulled from there. So we can check that box. And I think that's it for that one. So we'll move on to strategies. Label objects throughout the day. For example, when you take her to the grocery store, label food items as you put them in the cart. There's a lot of good information here. We see at the bottom, use clear and simple speech to talk to Elizabetta during your daily trip to the park. Label familiar items or people at the park. Make sounds when going down the slide. So if we go back to the rating, we see some action words in there. The family can start using at least one of those strategies right away. It's using items that are available within the child and family's environment. And it's based on things that the family is already doing, like going to the park. So since we've checked all of those, I'm going to go over to best practice. I think we can say reference natural learning opportunities. So when they're at the grocery store, when they're at the park. Next, we'll move on to 3A, measurable criteria. Where are you starting? Elizabetta has about 12 words, does not often repeat words after adults. She shakes head in response to questions and will sometimes say yes or no. So this is an area where you might scroll back up to the evaluation information. And I know that that is listed there. So I'm going to go ahead and check reflects information already gathered through evaluation, family assessment, etc. Next is 3B. How will you know when the IFSC outcome is achieved? We have Elizabetta will use 30 to 40 words appropriately. I'm going to go ahead and check does not appear to be individualized to the child or family. The timeline is missing, and it's not measurable. And then an acceptable, it does align with the IFSP outcome. And it looks like that's the only checkbox item in acceptable that applies to that one. And then lastly, we have the measurable criteria global outcomes addressed, acquiring and using knowledge and skill. And this one is just yes or no. Is it the global outcome that most closely aligns to the IFSP outcome, or is it not? I'm going to say this one is. Now we can calculate our totals for each of those sections. And here's an example of where those in-between scores come into play. We have 8 not acceptable, 8 acceptable, and 1 best practice. So I would give this section an overall rating of somewhat acceptable between that 0 and 2. And then this is the last page of the QIO, so it automatically calculates the overall quality rating and then shows you a breakdown of what you've applied for each section. And if you go back and make any edits, that's fine. You can click back through each of those pages. Just make sure you hit that calculate button again to recalculate your score. And then you click submit, and results will be emailed to you because you entered your email address on the first page, and they'll automatically be submitted for us to run our data analysis. And that concludes our demo. I'm going to go into some clarifications really quick before opening it up for questions. And that's some common questions that we got with phase 1 of QIO implementation. So we'll start with the global outcomes section. There was some confusion around the checkbox item in not acceptable that says strengths and needs information only contains new information not previously gathered. So that word only is black and white. So if you have some new and some previously gathered information, that would be considered acceptable. If there really is only new information and no previously gathered information at all, that's when you would use that not acceptable checkbox. There was also some confusion on when to check the acceptable checkbox that says evidence of age ranking is documented in strengths and needs. So here we're looking for language pulled from the global outcomes rating, such as beginning to and occasional use. And if we're not seeing that, then we wouldn't use that acceptable checkbox. And we'd look for some of those not acceptable ones, like containing technical jargon. Now on to the IFSP outcome section. How will you know when the IFSP outcome is achieved? Clarification was needed on determining if something has a timeline or not. So if we look at the first example, we will know he can do this when he begins using some words or gestures to let mom know what he wants. The timeline is missing or is only defined by the 6-month review because we don't have a point of reference. If we look at the next example, mom will know what book he would like to read at bedtime when he points at the book or uses a word associated with the book every night for 2 consecutive weeks. So this one we see a timeline and we have a realistic point of reference for that outcome. And again, for this IFS, how will you know when the IFSP outcome is achieved? Let's take this example and we'll make it into an acceptable outcome. When child is tired or mad, frustrated, he will replace a tantrum with a word to communicate that feeling or emotion. Let's see if we have all the necessary components for this one. Is it built into a routine? No. Is there a function to the desired behavior? Yes. So we want him to communicate feeling or emotion. Is the behavior observable? Yes, we want to see the child use a word. Is it measurable? And this one is not because it doesn't define how often the family would like to see this. And is a timeline defined? No, because we don't know over what period of time. And then we want to make sure that it's from the parent's perspective, which we would know by connecting it to the family assessment, concerns, priorities, and resources. So the revised outcome, child will let his mom or dad know when he is mad, tired, or frustrated during his bedtime routine by using a word to communicate that feeling 2 times per week for 1 month. And that meets all of those required criteria for an acceptable outcome. Next is 3C, the global outcomes. And we're noticing that assessors are selecting, we're noticing that multiple global outcomes are being selected for IFSP outcomes and that this is happening in most cases. So there are occasions where there might be more than one global outcome that closely aligns. However, that shouldn't be the majority of the time. So if we look at this example, child will say drink or milk when he wants a drink during mealtime at least 1 time per day. And if I saw global outcomes selected, taking appropriate action to meet needs and acquiring and using knowledge and skills, I would mark that as not acceptable because one or more of the global outcomes indicated is not the most closely aligned to the IFSP outcome. So with this one, the function is for the child to identify drink or what he wants to drink during mealtime. So the most closely aligned would be taking appropriate action to meet needs. If the outcome was child will label 5 new foods by name during lunchtime when he attends child care 3 days per week, then the correct global outcome would be acquiring and using knowledge and skill because the function of that outcome is to label 5 new foods. Okay, so let's pause and see if there are any questions on the tool itself or any of those clarifications that we just went through. And I'll go ahead and unmute you. Okay, everyone is unmuted, so feel free to shout out or type in the chat if you have questions.
Hi, Ashley. This is Laura. I'll prime the pump. Maybe people start asking questions here. I just wanted to note that when they're using the typing in the outcome, in order to get the correct rating, they're going to have to choose the measurable part as well. Not just if they have the two-part outcome with the broad outcome and then the measurable criteria, they're going to have to be sure and look at that measurable criteria as well.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, well, I'll continue on, but if you do have questions, type them in the chat and we'll get those. Okay, so for results, we'll be sending you guys self-assessment scores and verification scores, and then the percent agreement between the two, which will show us if you and the state team are using the tool and getting similar ratings. And then we'll also send you state averages to compare to your CCB averages. And we'll send you our CSAT measurement that we're reporting, which is the percentage of IFSPs that receive an overall quality rating of 2 or higher. And to start out with, we're going to be really low on that measurement, and that's what we're expecting. We're just hoping to see that number improve over time. So don't be alarmed if you aren't seeing any 2s in the beginning, because that's completely expected and normal. So what's next? You will receive your first IFSP sample list on the second month, or on August 14th, and then you will continue to receive sample lists on the second Monday of each month. And then you will have 2 weeks to complete those self-assessments. So those are due on the 4th Monday of each month, starting August 28th. And I'll always send a reminder of when they're due with the IFSP list that I send out to you. And then you will receive your first results October 2nd and continue to receive those on the 1st Monday of each month. And we also share the results with the Program Initiatives Unit for training purposes. We're currently discussing how that will play out. So we definitely want you to apply training needs internally, and then we can help support CCBs as we can with training needs that we identify as well. So you'll receive a QIO link and password specific to your CCB, and it's incredibly important that you only use that link for IFSPs included on the self-assessment list that I send to you each month. We hope to create another tool or a PDF file that you can use more broadly and use to assess other IFSPs. And we're not quite there yet, but when we are, we will definitely send that out. And lastly, we have a chatter group in Unicorn, and I think all of you should have been added to that. If not, please let me know and I'll get you added. And you can post any questions or comments in there. And I also put reminders for when things are due in there as well. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions. That's all that I have. And please ask questions. I know I went through that kind of fast. There's a lot of content to fit in today, and I kind of rushed through some things. So if we need to go back to anything, we still have half an hour, so feel free to shout out. I'll unmute you guys again. Okay, you're unmuted. So someone has a question. Lindsay, how many IFSPs will need to be reviewed each month? I'm glad you asked that. I meant to mention that will be dependent on the CCB size, as well as how many initial IFSPs were completed that month that we're looking at. So for the smaller CCBs, it could be one IFSP, and for the larger ones, we're seeing 20, just over 20 at the most. Is there anything else?
Hey, Ashley, this is Amanda. Oh, there's a question. I was going to read that one out for you. Is it possible to provide the SCs the criteria they will be rated on to use as a guideline?
So initially, this criteria was developed based on the training that the Program Initiatives Unit has done through the Go For It process. And once we get a baseline of data for these self-assessments, that's when we want to roll out a training tool that can be used more broadly and really show those specific criteria details that we're looking at. Amanda, do you have any more input on the timeline that we're thinking for that?
I don't think that we have a specific timeline just yet. I know that we started to work on kind of at least the outline for providing that information ahead of time. I would say just by virtue of using the tool, because in all of those rating sections, there's quality rating statements. I think we've heard feedback from even cohort 1 in their use of the QIO that they've been using it, and it's actually kind of reversing it as they're giving feedback on the scoring. The quality statements themselves lend to that discussion and kind of the criteria. So it's kind of been turned over, but I do think it would be helpful to having something as a guideline. And I would say that the QIO user guide itself could also lend to that in the meantime without having a specific kind of 1-page or 2-page guideline that has the criteria.
Yeah, I see that Pat and Tracy said once you try it, you'll maybe have more questions, and that's completely understandable. It's kind of a lot to take in right now, so I think once you get in there and start using it, you might have more questions, and I'm available whenever you do have those. Okay, give it another minute or so and see if there's any other questions. And
I think, let's see, Tracy had one. Is one person going to be assigned to doing this?
So that is up to the CCB. So we want the assessor to be someone that's in a supervising role or overseeing service coordinators. And you can decide internally how you want to distribute those self-assessments.
And I think to add everyone that's saying that we have to get started and try it to see, I think that's definitely true. And I would set aside more time than you would think, at least when you're first starting, to really look through all of the quality statements and get in that practice. It definitely speeds up as you go. And I think Ashley is a good example of going through the demo of having done so many on her end that you really start to you can move through it pretty quickly, knowing which statements are there and being able to quickly look at an IFSP in those 3 different sections that we're looking at and getting a sense of, okay, I know which column I should look at when you were thinking, starting working left to right in that rating scale. But it definitely, as you use it, it becomes easier, and that's when those questions evolve.
I see we have another question from Tracy. So could a lead service coordinator be assigned, or should it be our supervisor of the program? And I think we've seen both. The thing that we want to avoid would be someone assessing their own IFSPs to begin with, but there are smaller CCBs where that isn't possible, so we have to be flexible for those situations. And it really is dependent on who you think will be the best person in your program to be doing these self-assessments. So you definitely want it to be someone that can help with those quality improvement initiatives or give feedback on that, and someone that understands the criteria for an acceptable IFSP. And if you need additional help figuring out the best person in your particular CCB, we can help support you in that too. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions, I will send out that list of your first set of IFSPs along with the link for your CCB specific QIO tool and a password. And then as you think of questions, feel free to email them to me or post them in the chatter. And we will definitely follow up after your first month and make sure everything's running smoothly, or if you need any additional support, reach out at any time. All right, thank you guys.
Thanks.